Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our um, legislative and advocacy day, and happy early Valentine's Day. My name is Lori Chambers. I'm social action coordinator for the United Women in Faith of the Indiana Conference. Thanks for taking the time and energy to attend this morning. And a special thanks to Jackie Moore for our technical support today. I couldn't do anything without Jackie. So our event is sponsored by the United Women in Faith Indiana Conference, Church Women United of Indiana, and the Diversity, Missions, and Justice Administrative of the United Methodist Church of Indiana. This event is designed to equip and empower us to advocate for women, children, and youth, and actually advocate for everybody. But United Women in Faith especially love to advocate for women, children, and youth. And thanks to all the speakers who agreed to present this morning. We have such an exciting lineup of speakers. And we're going to have a Q&A after each one of them speak, and Jackie will be handling that, the questions and answers. So please remain muted throughout the event, and please feel free to unmute yourself if Jackie would call on you to speak. And of course, you can always ask questions in the chat, and Jackie will be reading them for us. This event is recorded and will be able to be shared later. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to an inspiring and impactful day together. And now I'm so pleased to introduce our beloved state president of United Women in Faith, LaDonna Weber. Thank you, LaDonna, for being here to greet everyone in the meeting. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. And those of us who are on Central Time were, running a little early this morning. Chris is nodding her head. She's on Central Time too. One of the guiding scriptures for United Women in Faith is Isaiah 6:8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am, send me." And for me, that's what Legislative and Advocacy Day is. It's getting equipped to be sent. So I hope that you have a good experience listening to the information that you're going to need to be a good citizen, to be a good Christian, and take this on the next step. Where do we go from here? Where do you go from here? And this is to equip you to take that journey. So thank you for being here today. We have great speakers. I say that because Chris usually sits around where I sit at church, and she'll poke me if I say anything bad. So welcome again, and I'm going to turn it over to Barb McCoy from Church Women United, and she'll get us started.
Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to this Legislative and Advocacy Day on behalf of Church Women United, both in the state of Indiana and nationally. We all share basically the same principles and even the same priorities. And so it's easy to work with the two of us together to do these kinds of events. It's really important for us to be knowledgeable about what's going on around us, to advocate for women, children, and youth, both Church Women United and United Women in Faith, and to just be a part of God's kingdom. So welcome all of you. And at this point, I'm going to share my devotion, which is actually in the form of a prayer. So let's be prayerful. Heavenly Father, we come before you with a grateful heart that we live in a country that values freedom. We remember those who have suffered due to persecution, inequality, and discrimination. Grant us your grace to build unity and harmony, to work together in peace and understanding. Gracious Lord, help us to cultivate love, forgiveness, and compassion for one another. Help us to cherish the unique qualities we are made of and seek to understand one another. Like Snoop Dogg said, it's too bad there had to be a commercial about the senseless hate that often pervades our interactions with those who are different from ourselves. Dear Jesus, let your love be a shield that protects us from division, conflict, and discord. In your mercy, heal the brokenness or wounds within us, mend the bonds that have been strained, restore broken relationships, and bring reconciliation where there is division. Heavenly Father, help us to extend grace, justice, and forgiveness in the same measure you have extended to us. Grant us the wisdom to navigate life's challenges and to reflect your light and grace to the world. In all things, may we seek to honor and glorify you. We ask these blessings through the merits of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Chris Zinkowitz is 30-year retired from a 30-year editorial and project management career at the United Methodist Publishing House in Nashville. She then volunteered at her church with the Creation Care Committee. Because a national summit about climate change and justice was done just down the street from the church she attended. Because that summit was truly a wake-up call, Chris took the training to become a United Methodist Earth Keeper. The project she came up with was to write 10 tips each month that could be used in local churches to help people become more aware and to have ideas of what they would do individually or as a congregation to be better stewards of God's creation. That mailing list is now over 2,500, and she is starting her 6th year of supplying the tips for others to use. She continues her connection with the planners of that national summit, which has now become the Creation Justice Movement. She is a writer and editor for the movement's monthly newsletter, a member of the annual conference organizing team, and has served on the advocacy team. Working with the Creation Justice Movement, she wrote the resolution on forming green teams, which passed the 2024 General Conference. Recently, she moved into an independent senior living facility where she mobilized interest into team action, setting up composting for the facility's kitchen, moving the dining room away from the usage of styrofoam, facilitating recycling, and arranging a show and tell event focusing on alternatives to plastic. She is currently collaborated on a book titled From Heart to Habit, Embracing Our Role in Loving Earth. It should be out in early summer. Please join me in welcoming Chris to our group this morning. Chris?
Good morning. And with such an introduction, one of the things you know about me now is that I am a person of words. So let me share my screen with you. And I'm assuming you can see that. Do I get confirmation of that someplace?
No, I don't see
No?
it.
Okay. Jackie, help me out here.
Okay, at the bottom, you should see a share button, the green arrow up.
Okay, and there it is. Sorry, I'm a person of words, but they don't extend to the whole business of computers. All right. There we go. Now you can see that, right?
Yes, you see it.
Yes. Oh, good. Thank you.
Mhm.
I feel better already. But what I wanted to say was I am a person of words. You can tell that from what she wrote, what she read about me. And I want to start today with 2 words that are very important. Thank you. Thank you for all you do. And thank you for being here today and willing to take on doing something more. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of that. I wanted to go take us back to two other sets of words that are crucial to our lives and begin with those. These are the words, God's word, the word made flesh. These are the words that change things in our lives and in our world. And they have the power to bring people together. Look at all of us. We're crossing denominations. We're from different states, at least I am, and it's brought us together. But words can be tricky. In the creation story, you have the word used often about God gave humanity dominion over creation. And what has happened through time has been that some people have taken that to mean domination. So take a look at that picture. There's the human being kind of on top of it, almost looks like stomping on the rest of creation. What if we change that word from dominion, change that concept to community? And again, take a look at the picture. When you have ego, you have that domination. And when you have eco and look at it, you start to see humanity as part of all of creation. It's not just human beings that are important, but all of creation. There's another word that I'd like us to change today too. The event has been advertised as climate justice, but for the rest of today, I'd like for us to think about creation. And climate is a word of science. And you can see there where the arrow is pointing that this is scientific information that tells us without a doubt that the Earth temperature is changing and our climate is changing. But when we take a look at what the scientists have been telling us, we see that as work that is very important. We certainly do not want to discount that in any way because the scientists agree. Those little squiggly lines are from different scientific labs across the world. And scientists are agreeing that the earth is warming. But our different word is creation. Let us talk about creation justice instead of just climate justice. That doesn't negate the science one bit. But what it does is help us to recall how much of all the world is a part of what we're working for justice. It's in the air, it's in the land, it's in the oceans and the other waterways. It's even beautiful and not so beautiful. It's big, it's little, all the way down to microbes that we can't even see. That's all a part of God's creation. And that helps us to frame our work that gives us a sense of this as being work of faith, not just work of science, but work of faith. Got to go back here. Sorry. So I want to ask you the question, and that is, what was the very first commandment that God gave? And if you think it's number one on this list, not so. The very first commandment God gave was in the creation story. God created and God gave humanity the job of taking care of the garden. Now, that's one way to look at it. The second one is these that you see, the Ten Commandments. Those were summarized by Jesus himself. We call them the greatest commandments. And the first one was to love God. So the question is, how do you love God? Well, if God is creator, then the way to love the creator is to love and take care of creation. And the second, he said, is like that. Love your neighbor as thyself. Well, then, guess what? Somebody piped up and said, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus then told that famous story that we refer to as the Good Samaritan. And of course, the Good Samaritan was the person who took care of the man who had been beaten and robbed and was in need of just basic help because he had been hurt so much. And the Good Samaritan added that and took care of it and took care of it himself. That's what we call mercy. Now, one other thing to look at is a dangerous road. So what if the Good Samaritan had gone back and said, okay, guys, let's take a look at this. There are too many people who have been hurt on that road. We need to fix the road. And fixing the road is a way to work for justice. It's changing the systems. It's changing the things that are a problem for people so that they need mercy and they need that extra help. But if you can fix the road, change the systems, then you can help to stop that. For more than 40 years, the scientists, whom we might as well think of as prophets too, have been warning us about the dangers of our warming climate. And what has our response been as humans? Well, dominion. I'm in charge. Greed. Ooh, there's money to be made here. And power. So, it's all mine. I can do it. Or ignorance, like, I don't know anything about that. I can't deal with it. Or denial. Oh, it's not true. It's not true. Or apathy, like, oh, it's just overwhelming. I can't manage it. Or convenience. Well, we like our easy life, and so we don't really want to change. Or despair. And that is when people begin to give up. There are two new words that have entered into the vocabulary in these last several years: eco-anxiety and eco-grief. And it's especially a problem for young people. And with your emphasis on youth, this is one of the things that you need to be aware of. Eco-anxiety is kind of a generalized sense of loss of future. What's the future going to be like? Am I going to have a place? Why do I even need to go to school? Why do I need even to live if there's no future? Eco grief is more specific to loss. And you think about all the families that have been devastated in North Carolina with Hurricane Helene, which, of course, was supposed to be climate safe in North Carolina, and in the California wildfires. And you can name tornadoes. I know Indiana is tornado country, as is Tennessee. And when young people, especially, experience that kind of loss themselves directly, or if they are aware of friends and family who have experienced that kind of loss, then there's a grief associated with it. So is there an antidote? I love this particular picture. This is the Dakota Sioux tribe, and they're giving us beautiful words. Defend the sacred. They've joined together because somebody wanted to put a pipeline through their tribal and sacred lands, a pipeline that would carry gas and oil. And they said no. And they had to do that. They worked at it for multiple years, and yet they have prevailed at this point. Doesn't mean it's done, but at this point they have prevailed. But what that has meant is that two things are really important: to have hope that you can change and to take action to make that change happen. But they've also done that with community and commitment and collaboration, and with resolve. And those are all very important words as you think about the task of advocacy in front of you. Advocacy is another word that might just substitute for or be augmented by that phrase, defend the sacred. Because as we defend the sacred, we're speaking up for things that are right and good for the common good, not just good in itself, but good for many, many, the common good. Stand alongside, show up, be present with. We had a situation here in Nashville, where I'm from, where the landfill people wanted to extend the acreage and the timeline on the landfill, but it meant that the community that it was going through, African American predominantly, would be putting up with that for many, many more years. They already had suffered because of it. And a lot of us from the churches, my church especially, were standing alongside. We went to the public hearings. We spoke at the public hearings, and it was defeated. It wasn't because of us, but it was because many people came to stand alongside those who were affected. In a sense, it's giving voice for the voiceless. But I want us to think about that in two ways. One is, you might say, well, Earth has no voice. We need to stand up for Earth. Earth has been crying out for years. The storms, the wildfires, the drought, the extreme heat, all of those things are Earth crying out for change. And they're not being heard. And the people who are affected, like the people at the Bordeaux landfill area in that community that I spoke of, are also people who have been marginalized because putting a landfill someplace or a pipeline someplace, as in the Dakotas, and the Mississippi River one that wanted to, the one that wanted to go through Byhalia, which is an African American community, the Byhalia Life Pipeline. They weren't being heard either because they were, quote, communities of least resistance. That's actually the phrasing that was in the official memorandum to talk about where to place that pipeline. So when people are not being heard, that's when we need to stand up and be a voice for those who are unheard. It's not that they don't have a voice, it's that it's not being heard. Our goal is justice. And I want us to think about what justice is. And sometimes the easiest way to think about what justice is to look at what it isn't. So let's spend some time with these pictures. On the upper right-hand corner, you have people working in fields. Now think about last July. It's a time of growing, a time when things need attention, such as hoeing that they're doing here. It's a time of harvest. People have to work those fields or the food will go to waste. But who works them? And what happens when it's extreme heat? You may recall that we have the Paris Accords, which we've been pulled out of twice now. But the Paris Accords were an agreement by many, many countries to keep the heat level from rising beyond 1.5 centigrade. We passed that in July last year, and we're on track to pass it again as we enter the summer months here. So what about justice for those who work to help us have enough food. Let's talk about housing. Take a look at the upper left-hand corner. People who are stuck having to live near a landfill are people who don't have any other resources, or they wouldn't stay there. But one of the reasons they can't get out of there is they can't afford other places. You and I, most likely, are people who have owned our homes and who have watched the value of our homes rise. That is a source of wealth. I'm not talking here about wealth like the 1%. Not at all. I'm talking about sort of just the average ones of us. But if you are living near a landfill, who wants to buy your home? Your property values will never go up and you're stuck. You don't have access to the easiest way to develop wealth in this country. Take a look at the lower right-hand side, the flooding. We know about flooding. We've maybe seen it up close and personal, but most likely we've seen it on the news. And what happens when you lose everything in a flood? If you've got insurance, maybe you can build back. But again, talking about property values, who wants to buy in an area that's flooded? So housing is an issue. Let's take a look at that center picture. The particulates that come out of manufacturing and particularly coal plants, but other manufacturing plants as well, go into the air. And while we can see this right here, we also don't see it as it dissipates out into the air, but it's still there with the particulates. And what that means is if you live close to one of these, then it's going to affect your health as well as your wealth. And who gets hurt the most? Children and older adults because of the health issues. But again, these are often people who are on the margins. One of the things when you think about children is that if children are sick, they miss school. And if they miss school, they're missing their education. And education has traditionally been a way out of poverty. And think also about their family. If my child is sick enough that I have to stay home, and I have a job that is a minimum wage or low wage, and I have to stay home, if I have to stay home too many times, I'm likely to lose my job. So there are justice issues that escalate out of just this business of particulates in the air. And air pollution is rated one of the very highest sources of ill health and death. Let's take a look at that kid down there who's looking at us. And while he's got a smile on his face, he's standing in amazing, awful situation. For a long time, the United States, a great producer of plastic, told us to recycle, told us to recycle. And what was happening was they were sending stuff off to third world, underdeveloped countries. And it was ending up there for them to deal with. We didn't see it, but they had to live with it. And often that meant children were a part of that situation. But there are two other things that are going on here as well. And one is that all of that plastic didn't necessarily get shipped there, but when it's dumped in waterways, waterways go to the ocean. And when waterways go to the ocean, there are huge, what they call gyres in the oceans filled with plastic that are harmful. They're harmful to marine life And if we care about the diversity and other beings on this earth, we need to be caring about the marine life that we don't necessarily see, but who think, oh, I'll take a bite of that. And then it's plastic and it's not nutritious and it can gum up the works and it can kill them. And then you just look at that child. Why would we want to have that child in our global neighborhood have to suffer any kind of injustice? Change begins when people unite. And I might add here, when women unite. Women have a track record of making change. Justice is realized when people act. And you may be saying, well, what can I do? Well, I want you to know about two phrases. And the first one is me power. Me, me power. And what you can do is, first of all, talk about the issues, talk about the connections, talk about it to your family, to your friends, but you also have to walk the talk and do something. And when you do that, there's an authenticity to your words. And people who are in your circles of influence are paying attention. So you have me power. When you do one thing, it spills out and helps the larger picture. And you may never know that, but you have that power. The second one is we power. That's pulling all of us together, which is what you are doing today, pulling us together to make a change. This is one example. We have a resolution and we've sent it. When I say we, I'm talking about the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. We send it to General Conference, which is our legislative body. So last year, we had the resolutions that were ready to go to General Conference. But before it goes there, people have to stop and talk about what is it that is the problem? How does that fit into our faith? And what do we do about it? So it starts the conversation, but it also calls us to action. And that's the power of a resolution. These are just 4 of the 8 related to creation justice resolutions that were passed at the General Conference last year. Forming green teams, paying attention to how we use our church land to make sure that it is in harmony with the needs of nature. Reducing the use of plastics, especially the single-use plastics. And paying attention to our own events and the venues where we have events, that we are making those things sustainable. And you will want to know also that United Women in Faith in New Mexico have had a tradition of passing a resolution every year for the churches in the New Mexico Conference. One year, they said, look, we need conference level leadership for our green teams to develop. Another year, they said, look, you got to stop using styrofoam, and you can do that in the churches. And another time they said, oh, plant trees. And planting trees is an act of hope because you're not going to see them grow probably if you're the age of me, but it is an act of hope and faith to plant trees that will reach out to the future. We're back to me power. Everything you do counts, whether you plant a tree, whether you write a resolution, whether you take mass transit to get someplace or carpool with somebody. All of these things count. Things that you don't do count as well, such as choosing not to do something that you know is harmful. Here are 7 different categories, and there could be more, of where you can enter and find something to do. Food, making sure that you don't have food waste, or composting. Energy, how you use transport. Planting more trees. Trees are the life, the lungs, not the life, the lungs of the earth. They take in carbon dioxide and they breathe out oxygen. And if we don't have trees, we don't have us. Money, where you spend your money, where you bank, and how you invest your money is really important. Taking care of water, eliminating as much plastic as you can, and those R's, refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. There are 7 of them at least. And you can the last one I always pay attention to is remember. Remember who you are. Remember whose you are. Here's a quotation that has given me a lot of hope. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Now, Margaret Mead was a sociologist, and she paid attention to the world, and this was her conclusion. And I think it's really important for us to remember that there are both in this quote, me power, individuals, and small group, we power. The United Methodist Creation Justice Movement, the one that was so influential in starting me on this particular journey, also is available for you. We have grown over these 6 years that I've been a part of it. And one of the things that we do is the newsletter. Every month it comes out and has amazing stories and information and so forth in it. And it's definitely worthwhile. We also have a movement cafe. The movement cafe is different from a newsletter. It's actually a Zoom call, and it's with people who have information and expertise in conversation, and then you as a participant can join that conversation as well. That's monthly. We have action alerts. And this is a case where if you are working in the area of advocacy, then knowing that these action alerts are identifying things that you can respond to and speak up for, you know that also that they've been vetted and they're worth following through with. The model resolutions, those are available for any church. It doesn't have to be United Methodist. You can go in and take a look at them because it's a starting point, and they're crafted especially so that you can rework it to address your particular body that you're going after, and it doesn't have to be United Methodist. We have a ton of resources. These include worship resources, resources that highlight the creation in the context of faith. So we have the Advent resources and the Lenten resources, and we also have Season of Creation resources for worship. Season of Creation is from the first Sunday of September through the first Sunday of October. And the tips, my favorite. In the chat, Jackie's put in there the special edition of the Creation Justice Tips. I wrote these with you in mind. These are solely focused on advocacy so that you can take a look at them and you'll have some information deeper about how to be an advocate and in ways that you can help through advocacy. But the tips themselves come every month and they're absolutely free. Oops, back, sorry, got carried away. The March tips are coming out on Tuesday. And this is what you would see. You will see an introduction over there on the side. And this one happens to be bye-bye to bye-bye. And focused on how we spend our money, which is another way that we stand up and speak up for creation. And on the right-hand side, you see 4 of the tips there. I write 10 so you can choose which ones are helpful to you, because you don't have to use all of them any place. You choose, and then you can cut and paste and put them in your worship bulletin or in your e-newsletter or whatever kind of newsletter you have. I even put them in my signature. Again, free stamp, and you have to sign up for them. Let's go back to the Word of God. And in the story of Moses, he comes upon a burning bush. And in his surprise, God says, "You are standing on holy ground." And the other thing that was clear was Moses is just an unlikely person to be a leader. And he knew that. And I think God knew that too. And God said, "Don't worry about it. I am with you." So when you feel yourself standing on holy ground and you feel the call of God, remember that Moses got the word of God. One of the things that has sustained me through this work has been from the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 3:6. And the story is that Paul was having to write to the Corinthians. Corinthians was a new church, and they were struggling because, on the one hand, they had Paul talking to them and teaching them and getting the church started. And then Paul leaves, and along comes Apollos, and Apollos has a little different take on things. And they're like, who do we go with? Is it Paul or is it Apollos? And Paul wrote this lovely thing and said, "I planted, Apollos watered, God gave the growth." So this reminds me that my work is not necessarily to be successful, but to be faithful. I am planting seeds. You got them out there. You got some of them. You are planting seeds too. Apollo, somebody else watered. You got to have water for things to grow. But God gave the growth. So your job is to keep working, to be faithful in the planting and watering. Plant seeds of your own, water others. Allow others to water the seeds that you have done. Stay with the work. You are called to that work. But always, always trust that God is the one who gives the growth.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the presentation. At this opportunity, I will be taking questions. You can put questions in the chat, or you can use the raise your hand feature in the Zoom and be called on if you have questions at this time. I can kick us off with questions. I have one. You mentioned being a voice for the unheard and how many marginalized groups are not being heard and they have voices. Why do you think that people in those communities and also people who are supporting them are being unheard at such at a time like this?
I think it's kind of human nature. And if we are looking out for number one, we don't look around. But I think that's one of the things that our religious tradition really focuses on, and that is the stranger, the widow, the orphan. Look around. It's not just you, it's everyone that God loves.
Okay, thank you. Questions in the chat. One, how to sign up for the creation justice tips?
It's the website is creationjustice.org. And when you go to that page right there, it'll say monthly tips, it'll say newsletter, and you can sign up for each one of them right there. And I encourage you just to browse through the website because it's extremely good. And I say that not I say that because I am thrilled with the people that I get to work with over and over again every month, and the kind of work that we do together to make it possible for you and others to do work as well. Everybody has a piece. I got a piece, I'm putting my piece in. You've got a piece, you put yours in. But when we get to that pot, there's plenty there to help everyone.
Mhm. Another question in the chat. How do we connect with you?
I'm sorry, say
How
again,
do we
please.
connect with you if we want to contact you?
Talk to LaDonna Weber.
Chris, is it
LaDonna,
okay if Chris, is it okay if I put your email address in the chat? Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
thanks, LaDonna. And then LaDonna also shared the website again, umcreationjustice.org. Any other questions for Chris? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and for presenting to us today.
So I'm planning to stay on because I want to hear what you guys have to say. So I'll be around and taking notes, and who knows, you may find your idea or your experience crafted into a tip to help somebody else. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take this time right now to do a 2-minute stand up and stretch before we come back, and Lori will introduce our next speaker. So we'll be back at 10:20. Larry.
Thank you. I am just delighted to introduce my friend Larry Kane. He is a retired environmental lawyer. He practiced 30 years for the Indianapolis law firm of Brigham Greenbaum Dahl, LLP, retiring as a senior partner. His practice primarily dealt with environmental permitting along with various litigation matters. Prior to entering into private practice, Larry worked as a lawyer for the Indiana Department of Environmental Management for 13 years, ending as director of the Office of Legal Counsel. Since retirement, Larry has been engaged in advocacy for action to mitigate climate change. So I'm very happy and pleased to introduce Larry. Thank you for being with us, Larry.
Thank you, Lori, for your introduction. Appreciate that. And good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all to discuss environmental and energy legislation currently pending in the Indiana General Assembly. It may come as no surprise that the Indiana legislature is not a friendly venue for environmental legislation, but we have to keep supporting positive bill initiatives. So let's dive in. Jackie, would you put my slides up, please? The first slide is simply a title page, so we'll move on to the next slide, please. In the second slide, we have a list of 5 bills that I've identified from those pending that seem to fit primarily in the purely environmental category, and we'll discuss these next. Next slide, please. House Bill 1583, first one we'll discuss, would create a task force on climate resilience and economic growth within state government. It would be focusing on assessing one, existing research and technology that would address risks posed by a changing climate. Second, it would assess how Indiana communities and the economy can become resilient to a changing climate. And thirdly, it would assess opportunities to grow the state's economy, such as by meeting demand for low carbon technologies, goods, and services. The Indiana government definitely needs to engage systematically in assessing the best steps for achieving climate resilience. So this is a very important bill. I recommend your support. Uh, Unfortunately, no hearing has been scheduled at this time on this bill. Next slide, please. Next, we have Senate Bill 307, which deals with brownfields. And if you're not familiar with that term, a brownfield is a property that is unused or largely unused because of the presence or suspected presence of environmental contaminants. Senate Bill 307 would fund the creation of an inventory of brownfields in Indiana. Such a list as public information is essential. It's hard to imagine it does not already exist. It would help the public make knowledgeable decisions on purchasing lands that may not be obviously contaminated. I again recommend supporting this bill, and this bill has moved faster. It has passed the Senate and referred to the House. Next slide, please. PFAS chemicals, perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, a big mouthful for chemical names. These chemicals are sometimes referred to as forever chemicals because they are very persistent in the environment. They're found in certain cleaners, textiles, some leather products, paints in some cases, and firefighting foam, of all things. Unfortunately, most of them carry a significant level of toxicity if they're in the open environment, and they are being tested and detected in public drinking water in some locations. The three bills rather, addressed on this slide, all address PFAS chemicals. I'm going to ignore the first one that I've listed because I think it is flawed in some respects and focus on the last two. House Bill 1366 would require the State Board of Health, Department of Health, to establish maximum contaminant levels in public drinking water systems. And these maximum contaminant levels would be required to be no less stringent than those adopted by US EPA. This bill should be a no-brainer. We should not expect anything less in terms of regulatory maximum contaminant levels for the PFAS chemicals. Recommend support of this bill. Unfortunately, no hearing has been scheduled. House Bill 1553 would prohibit the land application of biosolids, wastewaters, or industrial waste that contains a concentration of PFAS chemicals of more than 100 parts per billion. It sounds like a very low level, but in some cases, even lower concentrations can be toxic. This is a prudent requirement. Is it stringent enough? I am not certain, frankly, but tentatively I recommend support because this is a good step forward. Next slide, please. This bill, or rather slide, describes two somewhat similar bills. Senate Bill 321 designates 13 areas located within Indiana state forests as state wild areas. The significance of that designation would be that these particular areas would be managed for wilderness recreation, protected as natural habitats. House Bill 1447, somewhat different concept, but similar in also. It would require that 10% of each state forest be set aside as old forest areas. In both cases, the designated areas would be protected from logging and other so-called management activities that can be actually harmful in many respects to forests. You may be surprised to know that the Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry seems to value logging above all other uses of the trees in our state forests. So bills like Senate Bill 321 and House Bill 1447 are needed to protect our state forests, and particularly the mature forest tracts, which are the most effective in absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as a way of mitigating climate change. Both these bills should be supported. No hearing has been held on either. Next slide, please. This is another summary slide that lists about 10 different bills pending in the legislature dealing with energy and utility legislation. We're going to move to the next slide to look at some in particular. These two bills, Senate Bill 541 and House Bill 1581, both deal with community solar, and they're fairly similar in their content. Community solar involves the establishment or construction of community solar facilities by entities other than regulated utilities. They're called community solar because they make the output of the community solar facility available to individuals, families, churches, schools, small businesses, and others in the locale of the community solar facility that would like to avail of solar power, but find themselves unable to do so because they can't afford rooftop solar themselves, or perhaps they're renters and don't have the authority to put rooftop solar on their particular residence. So the community solar facility fills the void and allows persons living in that area or entities, small entities, to subscribe to purchase a portion of the electrical output of the community solar facility. That output itself is actually transmitted to the local utility distribution grid. Those who subscribe would receive a credit on their monthly electric bill corresponding to their respective share of the electrical output of the community solar facility. This enables people to afford or actually enjoy the benefits of solar energy's lower cost and its carbon-free electricity, even if they otherwise cannot put rooftop solar on their homes. I certainly recommend supporting this bill. This is the second year that a community solar bill has been sought. Unfortunately, no hearing has been scheduled on this bill at this time. Next slide, please. This slide focuses on the concept of limiting long-haul water pipelines that involve major groundwater withdrawals. The two bills described here are no doubt inspired by a controversial industrial development some of you may have heard of near Lebanon, Indiana, the LEAP project, in which groundwater was proposed to be transported from Lafayette to Lebanon to support the water needs of the project. I'm going to skip Senate Bill 4 in discussing it. It's, I think, um, not as well conceived as Senate Bill 256, which would create the Groundwater and Aquifer Preservation Task Force. It would also establish a moratorium on the permitting of major groundwater withdrawal facilities, that is, facilities that could withdraw 10 million gallons of water per day or more, until June of 2027. The reason I favor this bill is that it demonstrates the need for a task force within state government to systematically consider appropriate state policy that's needed to strategically address the use of scarce groundwater resources. We do not have an overarching policy in the state at this point. We need it. I recommend support of Senate Bill 256. And we'll move on to the next slide, please. This slide deals with three pieces of legislation: Senate Bill 423, Senate Bill 424, and House Bill 1007. They're similar in their content in many respects because they all deal with small modular nuclear reactors. The topic of small modular reactors has become a hot one of late because of the burgeoning demand for electricity in many parts of the country to power data centers that are springing up to support, among other things, artificial intelligence implementation and other intensive data applications. All three bills are, in my opinion, flawed and objectionable because they would shift the financial risk for development of these small reactors from utility investors to the ratepayers who are already burdened by increasing electricity rates. Given the history of nuclear power in the US, there's certainly some risk in whether these small modular reactors will prove financially feasible. I believe it's poor public policy to shift this financial risk to ratepayers. So I recommend opposing these bills. Unfortunately, they are on a fast track for approval, as you might suspect. Next slide, please. This slide lays out two rather disparate bills. They're not really related, but they both have things of interest. House Bill 1537 would again make net metering available to homeowners and others who install rooftop solar. The benefit of net metering is that for the rooftop solar facilities that generate more electricity at some times of the day than are really needed for powering the home, the extra or surplus energy is transmitted onto the grid in that locale. The net metering makes it possible for the homeowner with the rooftop solar with surplus energy to receive a higher amount of credit for the energy going into the grid. That helps accelerate the break-even timeline for the cost of installing the solar panels to begin with, because once you pass that break-even point, all the electricity you generate from that point on is totally free to you. This bill should be supported. It's not, let's say, favored by the state utilities. It has a steep upward path to clear. No hearing has been scheduled for this bill at this point, but I recommend support. Senate Bill 178, the other bill, is unworthy of support, in my opinion. It would declare state policy that natural gas is considered clean energy or green energy with respect to state or federal programs that provide funding or other incentives for clean energy initiatives. Natural gas is clearly cleaner than the use of coal for generating power, but combustion natural gas still emits carbon dioxide. It's not clean, it's not green, it's just less dirty. It should not be eligible for the incentives that this bill would seek to make it. So I would recommend opposing Senate Bill 178. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 254 would provide increased state credits for producers of biofuels. Biofuels are those fuels that involve a mixture of alcohol with gasoline or diesel fuel. And the alcohol is produced from fermentation of corn or soybeans. So the increased tax credit would presumably trickle down to some extent to the farmers who grow the soybeans or corn that are sold to the alcohol producers. But I think the bill is bad policy for at least two reasons. Whether or not the alcohol supplemented fuels overall produce more power than the amount of energy inputted into the overall process is a controversial topic. Some commentators believe that it is, on a net level, producing more energy, usable energy. Others say not, and that more energy is consumed than is really produced by the alcohol supplemented fuel. The bigger problem with this concept is that it incentivizes the shifting of farmland from production of food to the production of alcohol, producing fuels of at least controversial benefit. When we actually look with a broader scope at what has happened overseas, where similar federal incentives for biofuels have led to the clear cutting of rainforests. Indonesia is a prime example. In order to grow palm plantations, to grow palm trees where the produce palm oil, which is then a raw ingredient of biofuel, biodiesel. Trading the clear cutting of rainforests for some type of biofuel is a very poor trade, in my humble opinion. We need the rainforests, we need forests generally to provide carbon sinks to absorb excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that's what this bill would actually work against. So I recommend opposing Senate Bill 254. Next slide, please. This slide reflects what you may have noticed as we've gone through this discussion of various bills. Most of the bills, the great majority that I recommend that be supported, are bills that have not yet received a hearing in the legislative committee to which they've been assigned. Why is this significant? Here are the reasons that that's significant. Every legislative bill assigned to a legislative committee for review in the House in which the bill is introduced. A bill cannot be passed by the House in which it's introduced unless it has been approved by the legislative committee. That approval can't occur unless there is a hearing scheduled and conducted. So this is a key linchpin to any bill moving to fruition, enactment. The chairperson of a legislative committee has sole discretion on whether a bill will be scheduled for hearing or not. So if a bill is considered desirable but is not scheduled for hearing, a supporter should contact the chair of the committee to which this bill has been assigned to request that a hearing be scheduled. There is no guarantee that your contacting the committee chair will lead to the scheduling of a hearing, but it's less likely if you don't even ask the committee chair to schedule the hearing. And this is a very critical point at this time, because I hate to say that the legislative leaders of the General Assembly have set February 20 as the deadline for a bill to be passed out of its House of Origin. That's only a week from today. So if bills have not even been heard in committee, it's going to be very difficult to get hearings scheduled, bills approved, sent on to a final vote, all within 7 days. Thus, if any bills that you've seen today or otherwise know of have not had a scheduled hearing, you should try. If these bills are important to you, you should try to email or call the chair of the relevant committee today or tomorrow, at latest, to request a hearing. Otherwise, these bills will die on the vine. It's unfortunate that the timing is such that this particular program occurs only a week ahead of this deadline, but that's simply the way it is. We have a short time to act, and I encourage you to do so. It's my challenge to you. Contact legislative committee chairs to schedule hearings on critical bills that are specific and important to you. As Chris has said earlier, and said it well, your action counts. Final thing I would point out, there is entered into the chat a link to a document that I've also provided that gives additional tips to all of you for submitting comments generally on legislative proposals. And I hope that will be useful. I know this has been a whirlwind of a lot of bills, and if folks have questions that they would like to pursue later, I'd be happy to have my email address included in the chat so that people could contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry, for your presentation and all the bills that are out there. Like you mentioned, we have just a week for these subject bills to, pass their committees. So, and then I think somebody asked about this information. We did put in the flyer of these bills. So if you want to review those and read more about them, that information is available in the chat. And then also we'll put your contact information in, Larry, so they can ask you if they have some later. Okay, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, next, Lori will be introducing our next speaker, Andrew Bradley.
You did a really great job, Larry. Thank you so much for your presentation time. I know it took a lot of time and energy for you to put this together. Thank you so much. So I'm really pleased. We're going to shift gears a little bit. Our time now will be devoted to our Indiana housing legislation. I'm happy to present Andrew Bradley. He's the Senior Director of Policy and Strategy with Prosperity Indiana. He works with members and leadership to develop and advance the association's annual policy agenda, supervise policy and advocacy activities, while providing leadership on strategic direction of initiatives that affect Prosperity Indiana's mission, including public policy and advocacy at the federal, state, and local level. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Lori. Good to see you again today. As Lori mentioned, I'm Andrew Bradley, Senior Director of Policy and Strategy at Prosperity Indiana. Give me just a second. Let me share my screen here. All right, so let me do this from the beginning. Could somebody tell me, can you see this now, or give me a thumbs up? Okay, so I'm hearing some nods. So appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today with United Women in Faith. If folks had come to United Women of Faith's annual event, you have heard from me, and what we're going to talk about today is kind of picking up where we left off last time. I'm going to really briefly give a snapshot of Indiana's housing and affordability stability crisis. But really, I'm going to focus on what's happening here at the State House. And I am at the State House today. I'm in one of the phone booths on the third floor here. I'm talking with legislators about some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. I'm so going to give you a snapshot about what's on the table now, a little bit about what are some of the longer term efforts that we're working on, but I really want to focus on ways that you and the United Women in Faith can help today and this session, and ways that you can stay engaged in this effort to provide stable and affordable housing to Hoosiers. So very briefly, if you haven't heard about Prosperity Indiana, we are the statewide association for community economic development organizations and individuals. And so this page gives you an idea of who are our members. About 2/3 of which are nonprofit organizations. They're the on-the-ground community service groups who are providing affordable housing, homelessness services, other types of community-based organizations. And this includes a number of United Methodist churches and UMC affiliated groups. We also have public entities like cities and towns that are members, and also some private organizations and individuals that want to be part of this effort of strengthening Indiana's communities and improving Hoosiers' lives. One way that we do this is that Prosperity Indiana convenes and manages the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. So if you ever hear that name out there, we don't run the show, but we kind of convene the show. We bring together, now it's over 2,500 organizations and individuals statewide who are part of this coalition to provide housing affordability, tenant protections, and housing equity. And you can see these are some of our activities and recent programming that we've done. So I also want to just a little bit about me. I'm a United Methodist preacher's kid. And so actually, if you look on this screen, front and center down here, that's my dad and mom holding the book, and that's little baby Andrew right there. This is at North Street UMC, or North UMC here in Indy at 38th and Meridian. Shortly after this photo was taken, my dad received a call to ministry and went to Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary up in Evanston, and then he has been a UMC minister ever since. Now he's retired in Marietta, Indiana, but growing up, we lived in Shelbyville and Rockville and McCordsville. And then I went off to IU, and they went on to Brazil and Petersville, Indiana, and then Madison, and he retired from there. So they're currently living at the Otterbein Methodist Senior Living Community in Franklin. So while I'm not United Methodist minister myself, I certainly know what it's like growing up in that household. And I would say that all of my advocacy is steeped in the values that came from growing up in the United Methodist Church. So I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with United Women in Faith today about the issues that we're working on. Okay, so I'm going to go really quick here. But don't worry, I'm going to follow up with Lori, and you're going to get copies of these slides. So don't feel like you have to write something down real quick. You'll get all of these resources, and that's what I wanted to do, is provide this for you. So the reason that we're working on these issues, we find that Indiana has a rate of home ownership that's decreased, which pushes more Hoosiers to rent. But once you're in that renter pool, Indiana has one of the lowest supplies of affordable rental housing in the Midwest. And we also know that as housing costs go up, Indiana's incomes have not kept up, which means that more Hoosiers are pushed into, it's moving ahead without me, more Hoosiers are forced to rent substandard, too small housing, and we do not have the policies to help enforce habitability standards. So we need to increase the supply of safe, affordable housing, and we need to increase the standards of the housing that Hoosiers live in. So here's what we're talking about. Here's home ownership rates decreasing. The top line is the overall rate. It's declined a little bit, But down at the bottom, look at home ownership, especially for Black Hoosier households, is barely half the rate of the overall home ownership for the entire state. And so that's a real problem. And we've seen the decline in home ownership has concentrated in Black Hoosier households and also low income households. Then again, we're talking about once you're out of home ownership, you're pushed into this rental market that is too little, too unaffordable. Indiana actually has one of the lowest rates of affordable and available rental housing in the entire Midwest. And in fact, the single highest rate of severe housing cost burden. And so that's what we see on this slide. Here in this middle part with the bars, there's only 34 affordable and available rental homes for every 100 extremely low income Hoosier renter households. And the pie chart on the left, this is who we're talking about. The biggest proportion of the most vulnerable renter households are in the labor force. They're working households. But we're also talking about senior Hoosiers. We're talking about disabled Hoosier households, caretaker households, et cetera. And we believe that everyone has a right to a safe, stable, affordable place to live. So that's the issue that we're talking about. And I just want to show you this. This is an issue throughout the state. Sometimes there's an assumption, especially by our legislators, that this is just an Indianapolis problem or an urban problem. But this is Indiana's housing crisis affects rural, urban, and suburban parts of the state alike. And this map and the one following it is actually divided out by legislative district. And so here's another stat here. This is the severe housing cost burden. And we've created these maps and this data so that you can use it when you talk to your legislators about housing problems. So the folks see here in the dark orange, they may not realize how deeply the housing crisis affects even some of the most rural and suburban parts of the state. So that can be a real eye-opener when having those discussions. This slide shows that the incomes needed to afford housing have risen much faster than, or the housing costs have risen much faster than the incomes needed to afford them. So it now takes $22.07 an hour to afford a modest 2-bedroom rental. However, here in the middle of the page, you can see that the average renter only makes, well, yeah, we can look at it here on this slide as well. The slides are advancing without me. Takes $22.07 to afford modest 2-bedroom. 1 year ago, that was $19 an hour. So the wages needed have increased by over $3 an hour in 1 year alone. However, the average renter wage, let's go back a little bit, is $17.92. So it is several dollars lower than what's needed, and it's barely budged. So that is a problem. We're seeing more and more average Hoosiers be squeezed in terms of what is needed. And this is how that plays out in terms of the top most common occupations throughout the state. So as of this past year, 14 of Indiana's top 20 largest occupations doesn't pay enough to be able to afford a modest 2-bedroom rental home. And just 2 years ago, it was 9 of the top 20 occupations didn't pay enough. So we're seeing more and more Hoosiers working the same type of big jobs. They can't pay the rent anymore. So what happens to those folks is that they have to cut costs, they have to make trade-offs. They're skipping on medicine, they're skipping on extra food, they're skipping on being able to go back to school to get a better job, or more often than not, they are making do with uninhabitable housing. And so this is the type of story that we receive multiple times a week. A story of conditions like black mold that affect the health of Hoosiers. And unfortunately, Indiana does not have policies to enforce those health and safety standards. Indiana is one of only 6 states that doesn't allow tenants to use their rent in order to enforce health and safety standards that are supposed to be on the books. So that is a problem. And this is another story that we received here is that you had, in this case, raw live wiring hanging from the ceiling, and yet these apartments are charging full market rent. So this is not coming at a discount. Okay, Want to move pretty quickly. Then what this ends up causing is a spike in evictions. You have folks who can't afford housing. They're being charged too much. If they complain, it is way too easy for them to be pushed out. In fact, nearly 1 in 10 Hoosier households, renter households, has had an eviction filed on them in the past year alone. And if you're in Marion County, that's 15%. So that's a lot of renters. And then what happens is too many of those Hoosiers who have an eviction filed against them end up becoming homeless. And so we're hearing a lot of discussions about homelessness in Indiana. We've seen an increase of 11% in homelessness since 2017 versus only a 3% increase in the overall population. So Hoosiers are being pushed into homelessness because they can't afford housing. All right, so that's kind of the state of play. So now let's talk about what's happening at the State House this session and what's moving and what you can do to help us in these efforts. So first of all, I want to start with a positive bill. This is something that is moving. Senate Bill 142, eviction issues, would help strengthen an existing law that we helped put forward a couple years ago, that when you get an eviction filing on your record and it's A, not the tenant's fault, or B, they satisfy a monetary judgment, basically the landlord and tenant come to an agreement, it allows that eviction filing to be stricken from your record, sealed from your record. This would make that process more automatic. Right now, you have to go to a court, maybe get in touch with a legal aid lawyer. And we've learned that there have been over 31,000 of those eviction files that have been sealed since mid-2022. And we think that's 31,000 times that we don't need to have low-income tenants be having to go to court when they already qualify. So this bill is good. It passed the Senate with broad bipartisan support. It's going to the House. It needs a few little tweaks, but we're working with the author, Senator Liz Brown, Republican of Fort Wayne, and we think that we can have a good bill moving forward there. So that's a good thing. Now on to the things that are not so good. Unfortunately, just like Larry said before, there's so many good bills out there that aren't getting a hearing. And frankly, at this point, we know these bills aren't getting a hearing. So I'm not even going to ask you to call your legislators to ask them to get a hearing at this point. We just know it's not going to happen in the next week. But these are the type of things on the top that would have done a lot more good, that would have provided the court-based rent escrow that we talked about. Indiana's only one of 6 states that doesn't have that type of remedy. We had proposals that would have required large out-of-state corporate investor landlords to have a meaningful in-state presence, not getting a hearing. We had an innovative idea here for a whole home repair program that Pennsylvania has, not getting a hearing this year. Land banks to be able to redevelop vacant and abandoned properties. Now, that doesn't mean they won't ever get a hearing. Having done this work now for about a dozen years, sometimes it takes multiple years and cycles for these ideas to catch on. And just by having these bills introduced was a big help. But they're not moving this year. Now, at the bottom, there are several other housing bills that are moving forward. But frankly, those bills have the support of some large housing industries. I think both of these bills have good stuff in them, nothing really objectionable. But frankly, they don't need a whole lot of help. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them. But I do want to talk about something that is a threat that I do want your help with. This is the big one. I'm going to show you here in a minute. I'm going to put a QR code up, so you might get your phone ready, because this is something you could actually help us with today. This is a bill that is a big threat. There is an out-of-state special interest group called the Cicero Institute that has been pushing bills like this in multiple states, and they've been passing in multiple states. This bill first came up last year, but it died quietly. This year, it's not going away so quietly. It got a hearing earlier this week, and we've been told it's coming up for a vote in committee on Monday. So we need to stop this bill in the bud. Basically, this bill would require that in every city and town that police be involved in fining, ticketing, and jailing people who are sleeping outside because they have no other place to be. What this bill doesn't do is it doesn't provide any resources. It doesn't provide housing. It doesn't solve the issue of homelessness. It just criminalizes the vulnerable Hoosiers who've been pushed into homelessness that we talked about earlier before. So it doesn't provide any solutions. It just provides criminalization. It also then would sic the state attorney general on localities, towns, and counties who somebody might report and say they're not doing enough to fine, ticket, and jail homeless people. So that is a real problem, and it's a slippery slope. In other states, versions of this bill have also taken away state funding. We're worried that this bill could metastasize into a worse version. So if I have one request for you in a minute, it is to call your House member today to ask that they stop this bill in its tracks. Another bill that is dangerous that we're keeping an eye on and working is it's called property rights, protection of property rights, and it claims to talk about the issue of squatting. But the problem, unfortunately, in Indiana is that we allow verbal leases. We allow somebody to verbally say, you give me $300 and you can sleep in my barn. And that should be then a legal contract. This bill would make it too easy to then the next day after you took that $300 to fill out an affidavit, and it would require a sheriff or law enforcement to come and get rid of the person and their property without going to a judge, which should be what would happen in cases like that. You should be able to go through the existing court system, which is already very, very landlord friendly. So again, this is one of those things that's leaning on saying that this is property rights or anti-squatting, but really it's creating an extrajudicial process to get rid of vulnerable tenants by going around the court system. We don't have an action alert for this right now, but we will if when the time comes. So that's something I want to put on your radar. Okay. I'm going to go real quick because these things aren't happening this session, but I just want to let you know we are thinking about long-term solutions. We think that the governor should create a commission on housing safety, stability, and affordability. There are resources out there that could be better aligned to be able to produce more housing, to be able to more effectively deal with some of the issues that I've talked about with you today. We had a nearly 500 folks sign on to a letter for this for Governor Holcomb, and we've actually had a couple of productive conversations with the new Governor Braun about this. So we may be coming back to you to ask for your help in creating this governor's commission. That's one big issue. There's also models out there to help align resources better to help incentivize the production of housing that's affordable for low and moderate income households. We're looking at a program that you see here from Ohio. And the map here, like all those areas in blue, are places that would especially benefit from that. We drew up some draft language. It's not going to pass this year, but we're going to keep working on innovative ways to provide new housing that's actually affordable at the user end. And then finally, Indiana is one of these states that we really preempt localities, towns and counties from being able to solve a lot of housing issues on their own. So no wonder why we have so many problems in our towns and counties, because we tie their hands. And you can see Indiana actually it's the only state that preempts all these type of local solutions. And that criminalization of homelessness bill would actually add more another preemption on top of that. So now's the time when you could get out your phone. And again, you'll get a copy of this, but you could do this right now. Scan this code right here, and it will take you to our action alert about the criminalization of homelessness bill. We really could use your help for you to reach out to your House members and let them know that this is something that is not helpful for your community. It's going to ask you to fill out a letter. And what's always really helpful is to add any local context or examples that you have. If your church works with people experiencing homelessness, it could help to say it doesn't add anything to fine and ticket and jail and put criminal records on top of the issues that your church is trying to address with people experiencing homelessness in your community. So I'll send that link to you. That is something we could really use like today, tomorrow, before Monday, before that committee vote. And because if it gets out of committee, we could still use the help but we want to stop it in its tracks now. This is something else that you could do if you don't yet know how to find out who your legislators are. This link goes to the state page. And what I always want to remind people is to think about not just the legislator who represents your home address or the address of your church, but if your church draws from an entire city or big parts of a county, be thinking about making sure that you're reaching out to the senators and House members who represent that entire area. Everybody should have a stake in the outcomes of that community. So that's where this link goes to. And this is the link to stay involved with Prosperity Indiana to get on our list for us and our Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. So you could scan this right now and then sign up, and then you'll be in the loop when we send out any new action alerts, when we have events like those that are here on the left. And in other parts of the year, we come to different parts of the state. This is how you could stay in the loop very easily. And then real briefly, there's the federal level is a whole other issue we don't have time to get into right now. But this is Prosperity Indiana is the state partner of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. This would take you to their page so that you can stay in touch with those federal efforts. We also provide that as well, but that way, if you're really interested in federal stuff, then you would stay in the loop for all that. Okay, let me stop there. Thanks again. Happy to take any questions either through email, through the chat, or if there's time here today. Thanks again.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for your presentation. I know LaDonna answered some questions that got in the chat. There was one question about what are you doing to help Indiana citizens convicted of a sex offense find a safe, stable, and affordable place to live?
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time? And I'll try to find it in the chat.
It says, what are you doing to help Indiana citizens convicted of a sex offense find a safe, stable, and affordable place to live?
Oh, that's a good question. That is a very difficult, and I think the questioner probably understands, a very difficult population to find housing for. And I would say that we're trying to address housing for all vulnerable Hoosier households. And so if there's specific suggestions, happy to talk offline about that. But we have our eye to be able to provide a safe, stable, affordable place for all Hoosiers.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Oh, LaDonna just repeated the question. Okay. Seeing no additional questions, thank you again, Andrew, for the presentation. And like LaDonna mentioned, we're going to be putting the information available. This is being recorded, and we'll have additional information and Andrew's contact information provided later as well. Okay, Lori?
Yes. Thank you again, Andrew. Wonderful presentation. Wonderful. Thank you. Really appreciate your time and energy that you put forth for the presentation. Yeah, it's time to switch gears a little bit. We're going to have next on our agenda is Misha Wide. She is Executive Director of Children's Policy and Law Initiative of Indiana. With over 20 years of experience in strategic development of programs to enhance the lives of youth and families through community outreach work for organizations such as NCAA, Nickelodeon, Girl Scouts of Central Indiana. Misha is a connector for families and advocate for parents seeking equitable resources to reach children in Central Indiana. Thank you, Misha, for being with us. I'm on the board of Children's Policy Law Initiative and very happy to have a great relationship with Misha. I'm sure you're going to really enjoy her presentation.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Lori. To all of us joining here for United Women in Faith State House Advocacy Day, just want to thank you for giving your commitment to just learning about ways to be a great citizen. Children's policy and law is focused on working together to create excellence in school culture and climate. We do that by focusing on youth justice issues. Our mission is to advocate for systemic change for children so that programs, policies, and practices are developmentally appropriate, equitably administrated, and fair, and provide the necessary support for a child's successful transition to adulthood. And so we do this by fighting for youth justice, not just from a high level where you've got individuals like myself or Lori, but we often include youth through our youth justice leadership program. We participate in school events by bringing community members together. We also work very closely with educators, school guidance counselors, and youth organizations to make sure that they have the right tools and best practices in order for them to provide safe environments for students. And ultimately, our goal at the end of the day is to end the school to prison pipeline. And so, one of the key things that we draw attention to when we're talking about how we can create a better school environment to end the school to prison pipeline is looking at the student support services and the ratio that students are experiencing in schools. And so, this slide, you can see the ratio from staff to student as it relates to school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, and school nurses.
Nisha, sorry to interrupt you, but we're not seeing the window that you're sharing.
Uh-oh. Somehow it's paused. Let me try that again.
Misha, I think you need to put it on slideshow mode.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
All right. Let's kick it back over. You see my slides again? Perfect. So this is just an overview of our mission, making sure that we're working towards ending the school to prison pipeline. The slide that I want to talk about now is looking at the ratio of staff to student. And you can see guidance counselors, school social workers, psychologists, they currently have a high student to staff ratio. Here in the state of Indiana, those numbers are astronomically duplicated. So if you can imagine just the type of service and support that students are receiving, um, given the different traumatic issues that students are experiencing, those needs are significantly greater than what the school support is being able to address. And so one of the key things that we try to focus on is how can we encourage lawmakers, community stakeholders to help us to bring this issue to light. And so again, just drawing down a little bit further, looking at the ratio here in Marion County, those numbers are very similar to what you see across the state. But as far as school social workers, those numbers are a little bit better, but still significantly out of balance. Looking down over here at the school nurses, again, just given the current climate of health and different issues that are happening, school nurses are definitely in need of increase as well. And so we're looking at how we can offer more student support in the schools. And so this brings us to one of our key programs that we provide for schools and youth programs is our Positive School Discipline Institute. And so this allows us to be able to give best practices as far as trauma-informed, different opportunities, exercises, and mindset shifting for the educators and the school counselors to be able to implement in their schools. For one, we want to look at the overuse of out of school suspension and look at different ways to incorporate behavioral practices that will mitigate some of those suspensions. We're also seeing a significant increase of suspensions in public schools. So we're wanting to address that and give the teachers some tools as alternatives and ways that they can accommodate for some of these behavioral concerns that are happening in schools. What we noticed too is that the increase of these suspensions increases in a risk of the students being a part of the juvenile justice system, which again is one of the primary reasons that we're wanting to address the school to prison pipeline because of the academic failure that's experienced by these youth that are out of school. So what we did at CPLI took those concerns to the community and did a series of workshops, um, incorporated youth workers, different educators, and took from those workshops what are recommendations or different ways that we can incorporate more culturally responsive trauma-informed practices in the community to support the schools and help us to mitigate some of the youth justice issues that we're seeing in the community. And so from that, we were able to put together a report that is our best practice report. And from that report, there are 9 overarching goals and recommendations that we use to kind of fuel what we're sharing at the legislative session. And so the first one is listening and hearing all voices. And so that's one, raising the voices of our youth, raising the voices of those that are in youth spaces. We want to, secondly, create a consistent student-supported, safe, and affirming learning space in every school district, in every school, creating positive school climate. So looking at different ways that we can support that. Third is hiring increased number of licensed support personnel and staff. And so from the ratios, you were able to see just the fact that there's such a dire need for more staff. Fourth, we want to hire personnel that actually identify with the students. And so some of the practices that we've talked about are having a more diverse perspective and equitable approach to hiring practices and inclusion. Our fifth recommendation is to define and balance opportunities for school personnel and community services using a team approach. So not only using the resources within the school, but using assets that are in their immediate community. So this relies on the collaboration of businesses as well. Our sixth recommendation is identifying and providing more resources for unmet student needs. And so again, that's matching resources that the school may not currently have, but listening to some of the surveys that the schools are taking. Our seventh recommendation is to provide professional development for all faculty and staff members. And so this is a way for us to share some of those best practices to be more trauma informed. We use an approach that's based on a national curriculum that has been data tested and proven in other school districts. And so we want to share this with different schools here in the state of Indiana. Our eighth recommendation is to align law enforcement practices in schools with principles of developing positive learning environments and safe school climates. And so with this recommendation, we want to make sure that those school resource officers are supported. We want to make sure that they have relationships with students and have best practices so that they do support a positive learning environment in partnership with the educators. And our ninth recommendation in this report is to reform educational policies, laws, and match funding to align with creating positive school climate and culture to support the needs of all students. And so this brings us to some of the things that community members have said about this report. It's actually available on our website. We've made hard copies so that people can take these with them as they're visiting legislators or even just having community conversations. But the report tells us that leaders need to hear the voice and choose connection over correction to bring social emotional learning. And so this is from a youth participant from this series of workshops. Youth are also looking for someone that understands their needs and emotionally regulated and trauma responsive. And so this is just another one of those quotes where they're expressing what those needs are to feel that safety and comfort. We're significantly short-staffed when it comes to mental health resources. There are far too many youth that are struggling with mental health that don't have informed adults to connect with. This quote sticks out to me because it's actually the voice of a community member that's expressing a moment of despair. And so this leans into part of what we're seeing at the State House right now. So our 2025 legislative session has the good, the bad, and the ugly. Um, there's quite a few things that have been presented that haven't gone to the actions that we would have seen. But I'll kick us off with some of the things that are more of the good, some things that are bad, and what has ended up with the ugly. So let's just jump right into it. Senate Bill 359 is entitled Resilience and Well-Being. This particular bill is one that is actually brought from some of the research that was presented this summer during the summer study committee for the education committee. And so the report that I shared with you was presented to those committee members. And from that, they saw the need for increasing opportunities for students to have more well-being resources in the schools. And so these authors, many of them were a part of that committee and wanted to be sure that this legislative session was focused on uh, listening to what those needs are. And so, just to give you kind of an overview, this particular bill requires that the Department of Education, in consultation with the Office of Secretary of Family and Social Services, will approve for student mental well-being resources for certain schools, requiring that the schools actually publish what those programs are, and there's an opportunity for students to participate in coaching or to have this as a class. And so really the program is designed to help build resilience and grit so that the students are ready to learn. And so we're talking about looking at emotional regulation, different resources in the school to assist with their ability to learn. Currently, it's gone through the second reading, has been amended, and it's moving forward. And so this is one of those good bills that we're excited to see the voice of the youth making an impact at the State House. House Bill 1241 is another bill that we're looking at that is addressing trauma-informed care. And so what's exciting about this, if it does pass through the House, is a commission that the legislators will focus on looking at those tools and resources that will be provided to schools so that we can create a better environment for children, youth, and families. And so this is a great opportunity for us to contact our House members and tell them that this is something that we would like to see take place, get their support, and have this commission developed in the future. Now we move into what we're calling our bad section of the bills. House Bill 281 is entitled Expungement. This particular bill focuses on uh, removing the juvenile delinquency expungement that was just voted on a few years ago. And so, really, what happens with this particular bill? Youth have an opportunity for reconciliation and rehabilitation because their juvenile records are expunged or so they're removed. This bill would remove that opportunity for you to have rehabilitation, which would also jeopardize their future as law enforcement officers, military members, and just different careers that would then see what their juvenile records are. And so if you imagine being a 44-year-old adult law enforcement officer pulls you over for a traffic offense, if this bill passes, they could potentially see juvenile offenses that don't show your growth, don't show rehabilitation, and it could negatively impact your current career. And so we're wanting to make sure that lawmakers understand the impact that this will have on our community. We're also concerned about the privacy of juveniles if this information is made available to law enforcement officers. And so it's in the first reading with the committee. And so there's an additional reading that's coming up. Another bill that's being presented in the same committee looks at unlawful possession of firearms for youth. The language here is just based on possession. And so this would file a felony for this youth for being in possession of a firearm. And so we're looking at lowering those charges, presenting just again opportunities for you to have um, rehabilitation and reconciliation. And so we're hoping that this will get an additional reading from the committee to look at ways to minimize opportunities for you to be criminalized. Our last speaker shared a little bit about House Bill 1662 and the criminalization of homelessness. And so we bring this to you as a youth justice issue because of the significant number of youth that are homeless. And so, again, as recommended from Andrew, we just want to make sure that people contact their House members and tell them how we do not want this to pass. There's several fines that are connected to it, and it's just something that we feel would negatively impact our youth that are experiencing homelessness in the city. One of the bills that caused a great bit of uh, negative information that was been shared is a House Bill 1136. This particular bill proposed to uh, reorganize the largest school system here in the city of Indianapolis, as well as the largest school system in Gary, Indiana, along with three others. Um, the issue that we saw with this is just the negative impact on so many youth with having this restructure. And fortunately, there has only been one reading there, but it is still something that we want to keep an eye on because of the disruption that this would have caused for youth to have negative school climate. This particular bill, House Senate Bill 289, is entitled Non-Discrimination in Education. I'll read the details for you. It established prohibitions and requirements on state agencies, state educational institutions, and health profession licensing boards regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this bill, I only put a small section for the details because it is such a long bill. And if you can see by the number of authors compared to others where there may have been one, two, or three, it's a very heated bill that we want to draw attention to as it's going into the House. And so this bill prohibits the use of certain words like bias, race, equity, and creates a censorship that keeps education programs from discussing any of those issues. And so, one of the things that is an issue for us with our program and professional development, as we're talking about being trauma informed and culturally responsive, this can put schools in a position that they fear having those conversations. And so we're wanting to contact House members and let them know that we want to lean into being able to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in education spaces. And so as you can see, it's passed in the Senate and referred over to the House. So we want to encourage community members to contact their House members about this particular bill. You may already know this, but the links that you should be familiar with are here in this particular slide, where you can talk to your legislators, find out who committee members are, and you don't have to just focus on that during the session. You can always contact them when they're having their study sessions in the summer. Just making sure that they're hearing from the community is what's going to be the best way to make impact. So you see my face here. Wanted to share this slide with you because of the emphasis on the work that we do with CPLI, dedicating my service to breaking barriers to grow equitable opportunities for youth and families to thrive. And so that really ties into the work that we're doing at the State House. My team, some of you may be familiar with Dr. Gwendolyn Kelly, who's a senior executive consultant for our organization. D'Amica Marshall is focused on our Youth Justice Leadership Program. And I highlight her because she was actually one of our interns. And so just showing the opportunities that our organization is providing to help to mitigate some of the youth justice issues. Sandy Runkle is our program associate for the Positive School Discipline Program. She comes to us with a great deal of social work background and experience. And then Madeline Gregory is our communications consultant. So if you're receiving any of our communication through our newsletters or even some of the press documents that you've seen, she's going to be on top of that. Lastly, if you're interested in social media, you can find us on all of the platforms. Just another way for us to share some of those bills that are of issue, making sure that they're attainable for the general community. And I have this slide here to show you, one, our website has several different resources that are made available to you, but our Coalition for Youth Justice, this photo is actually from Youth Day at the State House in 2024. We brought a core of our youth justice leadership participants to see the process, be able to meet legislators and have their concerns for their peers' issues heard. And so we want to look at just different ways to incorporate more community members to support them. And so if you're interested in being a part of that, our Coalition for Youth Justice is interested in adding more members, just again, informing you on different information. That's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Misha, for your presentation and being available to us today. If there are any questions, please put those into the chat or use the raise your hand feature. LaDonna and others have placed into the chat various links related to your organization and the report that you mentioned earlier.
Thank you so much, LaDonna and Jackie.
Okay, Crystal? Crystal, you have your hand raised.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sort of two questions. So, does your organization work with the school with Indiana's universities who have programs for like nursing, psychology, so you can have internships to kind of help with that staffing?
Absolutely. So we
Yeah.
currently have a strong partnership with the IU Indianapolis School of Education. And so we provide workshops, different presentations for their students that are interested in education as well as social work. But we're definitely open to other universities as well.
How about School of Nursing?
We have
Since you're,
not worked with them directly, but we are open to that relationship.
because I was shocked by your staffing ratio. My
Mhm.
mother was a school nurse, and I didn't think it was that high, but it probably was higher now than it
Mhm.
was with her. And then two, does your organization work with are talking to our federal representatives, because I see today there is a confirmation hearing for Linda McMahon, the education secretary, to let them know about staffing situation, staffing
Yeah.
levels.
Yes, I appreciate you bringing that to our attention as well. We are a part of the National Youth Justice Coalition, and so some of our partners are in DC, some are across the country, and we have several conversations about these different issues that are related to the criminalization of youth.
Okay, and staffing levels, because since they're talking about staffing cuts, I mean department cuts and pushing everything back to the states.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Crystal.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal, for your questions. And I don't see any more hands or questions. So thank you again, Lisa, for your presentation and the information that you were providing and for answering questions.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm going to move now to Barb McCoy. She is going to introduce our last speaker, and that is Bishop Tracy S. Malone. So, Barbara?
Thank you, Jackie.
Mhm.
It is my extreme pleasure to introduce all of you to the new bishop of the Indiana Conference United Methodist Church. Bishop Tracy Malone began her assignment to the Indiana Conference September 1st, 2024. Before her appointment to Indiana, she served 8 years as bishop of the East Ohio Conference. Bishop Malone serves on the Board of Trustees at the United Methodist Affiliated Institutions of Higher Education and Organizations in the Episcopal area. She is currently the president of the Council of Bishops, which includes all bishops in the United Methodist Church, and a member of the College of Bishops, which is comprised of the United Methodist bishops in the North Central jurisdiction. She is a member of the Board of Trustees of Africa University and the immediate past president of the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women. Bishop Malone was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and was raised in Chicago, Illinois. She is the daughter of the late Reverend Willie and the late April Smith. She grew up in the United Methodist Church and accepted her call to ministry at the early age of 13. During her ministry, she pastored several churches, served as the district superintendent, and provided leadership to various community organizations. She has authored chapters in several books, published articles, blogs, and book reviews, and has taught courses as an adjunct professor at several higher education institutions. Bishop Malone has a Bachelor of Arts in Religious Studies and Sociology with a minor in Computer Science from North Central College in Naperville, Illinois. She holds a Master of Divinity from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois, and has earned a Doctorate of Ministry from United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. She and her husband, Derek, are the parents of 2 adult daughters. At this time, I present Bishop Tracy Malone.
Good morning, everyone. It is truly a joy to be with you this morning, and I want to thank you, Barb, for that introduction. And I also want to thank Lori for the invitation to join you today for this legislative educational event. I am extremely grateful to the United Methodist Women of Faith, the United Women of Faith. I am grateful for your ministry and for you hosting events like this, events that educate, events that gather and garner the resources to help clergy and laity, not just of the United Methodist Churches in Indiana, but all persons participating to fully understand what is at stake. To fully understand the legislation that is currently at the State House, but even more importantly, how those bills, how that legislation directly impacts our communities, impact the people that the church, we the church, are called to serve. Today, as I've been listening to the last three presentations, bills related to the climate crises and the environment in which we're in, um, bills related to the affordable, safe, and stable housing, and the most recent presentation on bills related that addresses concerns regarding our youth. And when I think about all that we have heard today and think about even who we are as United Methodists, why this is so important to our work, and I will call this our discipleship work, is because our United Methodist social principles, we affirm that affordable and stable housing is a basic human right, and it is essential for human dignity. We advocate, that's who we are as United Methodists. We advocate for policies and initiatives that ensure that all people have access to safe, sustainable housing. We have a commitment, a deep, long-standing commitment to environmental justice that calls us to protect God's creation, but also that calls us to address the harms of climate change and to advocate for policies that promote sustainability and equitable access to clean air, water, and land. As United Methodists, we have social principles, again, that govern how we live out our faith in the world. We have social principles that affirm the sacred worth of all young people. We call for a justice system that prioritizes rehabilitation, restoration, and opportunity over punishment. We, as United Methodists, we oppose policies that criminalize youth, particularly those that disproportionately affect marginalized communities. And we have a deep commitment for advocating for alternatives to incarceration, such as education, mentorship, and restorative justice programs. That's who we are as United Methodists. That's why this is so important. And again, I am so grateful to United Women of Faith for you planning and making this kind of learning forum available to United Methodists here in Indiana and beyond. Our social principles remind us that discipleship is not just about our personal faith. Discipleship is not just about prayer. Discipleship is not just about Bible study. All of that is part of our faith formation. Discipleship is also about our public witness, our prophetic witness. It's about standing up for justice, advocating for policies and practices and laws that reflects God's love, God's justice, God's equity, and working for and advocating for the common good and the welfare of all persons, especially those who live their lives on the margin. So I am encouraging whoever is listening now and who would ever have access to what we're doing here today, I am encouraging all United Methodists in Indiana, clergy and laity alike, to engage in this vital work of advocacy. I am encouraging all United Methodists to advocate for policies that care for God's creation, push for accessible and affordable housing, and speak out on behalf of the most vulnerable among us, especially the youth. Contact your legislators, educate your congregations, show up and attend the hearings, stand up for justice, and make informed choices and decisions that aligns with our values of justice, our values of equity, our values of mercy, our values of love. This is not just political work. It is discipleship work. and is part of our calling as followers of Jesus Christ. Through prayer, through action, through our faithful witness, let us commit to building a world, a society, a state that reflects God's love and justice and care for all creation. And let us do so, and let us do this together, being all in and moving forward with courage, with conviction, and a commitment to justice and hope. That is our work. And it's all of our work to do. It's our faith work. It's our discipleship work. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we come before you this day. We come grateful for the call you have placed on our lives to love mercy, to seek justice, and to walk humbly with you. Lord God, we recognize that advocacy is not just an option, but it's a sacred responsibility, an expression of our discipleship and our love for our neighbor. Strengthen us, O God, to be bold and faithful witnesses. Give us wisdom to understand the complexities of the issues before us. Give us courage to speak truth to power and perseverance to continue this work even when it gets hard. And Lord God, right now it is hard. We are living in hard times, but we know that you are a God of justice and hope. And so we place our trust in you, and we ask that our efforts bring about your justice for the poor, dignity for the marginalized, and care for your creation. Lord God, I ask for a special blessing upon our leaders, both those in our government and those who lead in our churches and in our communities and in our many organizations that are working for the good. Stir their hearts, stir our hearts to, as your people, remain steadfast in the work of building a world, building communities, building a state, building a nation, building a world that reflects your kingdom. Lord, we ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our greatest example of love and justice. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Malone, for your closing remarks and for your prayer and for your call to action, call to discipleship, and encouraging us to continue to be advocates and faithful witnesses. Lori, do you have any closing remarks as well?
I'm sitting here in absolute awe of the day. I've just been thrilled with your closing remarks, Bishop. We are so blessed to have you here in our state. Thank you so much for joining us today and your wonderful prayer and remarks. We couldn't ask for anything better than that. And all of those speakers, I think they just did a fabulous job. And thank you for everybody here for joining us. And let's go out and do the work. Call your congressmen, call your senators, email them. So anyway, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions about how to reach out to your legislators. Thank you, everyone. I think, do we want to have any other closing remarks? Do you think, Jackie, are we going to sign off?
Lori, I'd just like to say thank you also to all of the presenters and especially to Bishop Malone for joining us. It's been a wonderful experience for Church Women United as well. And we join in the same work that United Women of Faith are doing. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As mentioned before, this is being recorded and will be available on our Facebook and our YouTube page, and the materials will also be made available as well. Appreciate you all being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie, for all your help. Wonderful, wonderful job, Jackie. Thank you.
God be with you all. God bless you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you again.
Goodbye, everybody.